Hi and welcome to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. For our free tutorial here on YouTube today, I'd like to share with you my bead stash bangle. Now you can just dive your hand into your big old stash of beads and collect them together, or like myself today, you can use the larger hold beads that are left over from another project. Let's head down to the board and we'll talk about materials and the bead techniques today. So I've made an example bead stash bangle just here using the larger hold beads from this Flamingo Beach collection. And what I did was I just went through and pulled out any of the beads that will fit on a larger wire. So my main wire I'm using today is this 1.25mm gauge, equivalent approximately to 16 gauge wire. And I've created this piece with the Flamingo Beach, and the one I'm going to create with you comes from Mermaid Grotto. Now there are some lovely other beads in there which you could add as charms and dangles if you wanted to. In fact, let's pop those in there as well and see how we do for space. So the first thing that I'm going to do is to talk to you about the wire. Let's just pop that over to one side for a moment. There are two gauges of wire in today's video. Our primary wire is 1.25 16 gauge, and I'll be working with around about 12 inches. Now, dependent on the size of the bangle you wish to end up with, I'm adding around about an inch so that I can create these loops on either end that are about ½ an inch each. And then you can do the maths thing if you want to work that out. So generate some numbers with pi and so on and so forth. That's a little bit beyond me. I know that 12 inches will be enough, and that's what I'm going to work with. So in order to add some detail to this bead stash bangle, I'm also going to be working with some scraps or offcuts of 0.8mm gauge wire, equivalent approximately to 20 gauge. So the first thing that I've done is just made sure that my main wire, that heavy gauge wire, is nice and smooth. I've also added a little bit of strength and rigidity to it by passing it through the wire straightening tool, which is this thing, and I can point you towards a how-to video where I show you an alternative way to use this. But basically you pop the reel on like so and pull that along the length of the wire, and that will both straighten and strengthen the wire so that it's beautiful to work with, and it's also got a little more rigidity than its size would normally allow. So the first thing that I will actually do is thread all of my chosen beads on to almost but not quite fill the length that I desire to have beaded, and I will leave myself probably about an inch short so that I can add these detailed bead wraps, maybe just a little bit more than an inch short of the distance you need for your finished piece. So rather than watching me slide all these on in a very uninteresting fashion, I might need to straighten that end out before I do that, what I'm going to do is just leave you for a second and get these all lined up to ensure that they all sit neatly in some kind of relatable way. Now you can go completely random if you want to. With the one for Flamingo Beach, I made a completely symmetrical piece. It appeals to my sense of design, but you can go completely random if you prefer. So I'll join you back in just a moment. I've added all my beads onto that 1.25 or 16 gauge wire, and I've just turned a little loop on either end of that wire just as a temporary placeholder, so that when I drop it, not if I drop it, but when I drop it, all the beads don't go sliding off. Literally demonstrated that to you without meaning to. Let's have a look at this on the board, and then we'll find a way to just add a little bit extra to the design. So I've just turned a little bit of a loop on the end to stop those beads from sliding off, and I may need to remove some beads if it all gets a little bit too long. And what we're going to do is just slide everything away from that centre point to give us a little bit of space to work on my main focal bead. And I like to have a focal bead that is individual and opposite the connection point. So in this instance it's plain, but it's highlighted with two little bead caps from that Flamingo Beach mix. I really like how that looks, but I'm running symmetry on both directions from that point in the very centre of the wire. So what I'm going to do now is grab one of those scrap pieces of 0.8mm 20 gauge wire, and I'm just going to smooth that through so it's nice and warm and toasty. And I'm going to demonstrate to you just one time how you can highlight each of these lovely beads that you want to add a little bit more definition to. So I'm just finding the centre of that scrap piece, and the piece was probably about 5 or 6 inches in length, and I'm just putting a gentle curve in that as a place to start. I'm going to hold my smooth bead in the centre. Now you can have a plain bead in the centre and then flank it with enhanced beads, or you can have an enhanced bead in the middle, whatever makes you happy. What we're looking to do though is to keep that approximately in the centre of the heavy wire, in the centre of that lighter wire. So if I grip that around the edge of my bead for the time being, I'm going to bring one of those tails all the way around, and I'm going to wrap that wire, having warmed it gently, a good 4 or 5 times around the core that goes up the middle of all of our beads. Now the number of wraps you have depends on how much space you want to take up. I might just stop at 3.5 wraps there. You can see that we've got plenty of wire from that scrap to work with. Let's give that a quick trim and pop that in the pot for later use. So I'm just going to smooth that end section down by giving it a very, very gentle close up with those pliers, and just rotate those pliers around to make sure that that sits neatly down. Now you can see that this wire comes away at a slightly jaunty angle. I want that to be very, very close to the rest of those coils. Now at the moment it doesn't matter that the cut end is on the top, because we're going to add another layer to this in just a second. If I flip the design now up the other way, it's easier for me being right dominant, we're going to take a look at what we've got so far. Now you can see that the lighter wire, the finer gauge wire, is coming off the top of that core wire. And what I want to do is to draw that around the edge of the smooth bead and take it underneath the core wire on the far side. So we're looking to have a very nice smooth flow of wire from the top to the base, the underside, or if your wire's coming underneath, then take it to the top side. And what we will then need to do is to replicate the number of coils we created on the first side of that bead. So we're going to go for 3.5, I think, and then we're just going to tighten those up slightly. So I've chosen very stable beads as the ones that I'm going to add some definition and extra wrapping to. And then once I've got the same number of wraps going around, I'm just going to trim that wire away for later use or recycling. And then again, I'm going to ensure that that sits flat down around the core by rotating my flat facing pliers around. So this can move up and down a little bit, so if you're not completely in the centre, you can slide that to where you need to. We're not looking to crimp that wire so hard that it simply cannot move. So you can see that that looks quite pretty by itself. If you want to, you can just stick with the one wrap, adding a little drama to your beaded bangle. It's not a bracelet, it's a bangle. I'll get there in the end. What we're going to do now is add a second layer of enhancement. So I have another approximately 6-inch length of that 0.8 or 20 gauge wire, just getting that warmed through. And what we're going to do is run that in the opposite direction. So we've got one section of wire going all the way around on the underside of the bead as we're looking at the screen now. So what I want to do is reflect that, but in the opposite way. So you can, in exactly the same way, pop a little bit of a curve in the centre of your finer wire. And because my wire travels from on top on the left hand side to underneath on the right hand side, I'm going to oppose that now. I'm going to start with my finer gauge wire on top of the core on the side where it skirts underneath. So if I just pinch that very firmly into position, what I'm going to do is coil the finer gauge wire over the top of that first coil that we created, keeping that nice and neat and tidy and as close as we can until we've completely covered up that first coil. So what I'm going to do now is trim that wire away, again reserving for later use or recycling, and then we're just going to give that a little gentle pinch to ensure it sits neatly and as close as possible to the rest of that coil as it possibly can be. Then we're going to flip the whole thing up the other way so it's easy for me to handle. The finer gauge wire is coming over the top on this side, which means in order for it to be symmetrical, I want it to travel to the underside of that core wire on the right hand side of the bead. So if I bring that wire around, we're going to again fill that space over the top of the initial coil. We'll just turn that upside down so that we can trim away the excess wire, again reserving that offcut for later use or recycling. And we're going to give that a bit of a squish just to keep it nice and neat and tidy. So the joy of this beautiful technique is that you can smush these wires gently so that they sit directly opposite on either side of the bead, and you get this lovely flowing, almost twisted enhancement to that design. Now, dependent on how much wire you want to fill with beads, depending on the wrist size that you're catering for, you may wish to repeat on other beads. You can create the same technique using a cluster of beads. You can do it on funny shapes as well as smooth shapes, but I genuinely think that round or oval like this oversized rice bead are really perfect ways to use this enhancing technique. So what I'm going to do is just check my sizes, see whether or not I need to add some more enhancement wraps, and then I'll show you how to finish off this bead stash bangle really quickly. Super easy, super accessible, and you just need 2 gauges of wire and a handful of odd beads. So I've done a quick measurement and it seems that I have enough enhanced beads and beads on my strand. Now, if I really wanted to enhance these other 2 beautiful blue beads, what I could do is just smooth those ends out, take off a handful of beads from the end, for instance the gold spacer and one of these beautiful barrel beads, and then I can add enhancements to these rice shaped beads, and then it would be approximately the same length. But in order to move on with the tutorial, I just want to show you how to finish this design off. So having slightly more wire than you need, for instance I was looking for an 11-inch in total to give me approximately a 10-inch round, bearing in mind that you can't make that 10-inch to fit because it has to go over the hand. So this one is about a 9.5-inch bangle, and that slides over my wrist really nicely, slides over the widest part of the hand, but is still a wearable piece of jewellery. So once you've decided how much bead space you need taking up on that length of wire, what we can do is just scooch that all the way along to one end for the moment. If you've got enough spare, you can indeed smooth that last little hoop away and reuse that wire. If you've got spare and it's a bit quicker for you, what we can do is make a bend 1/2 inch from the end, having cut off that loop. And then we're going to make a nice solid round shape on the end of the wire. Sorry about the noise, it's the wire at the other end scooching all over the desk. So I'm just going to rotate that around. Made a bit of an angry job of that because I'm trying not to make too much noise and failing miserably. Let's just roll that over and close that loop shape up. So I'm just going to get that really good and strong. If I found that that was a really ugly job and I wasn't happy with it, I do always have enough extra wire spare just to be able to redo that, which is why I encourage you to use more than you need. A little offcut here and there is much easier to deal with than having to recreate everything. Although, just as an FYI, if you're very careful, you can slide this enhancement off and slide it onto a new piece of wire. If things go terribly wrong, you can save some of your work in that way. So I'm overall actually quite happy with that loop. Give it a squish to make sure it's super solid. Now if we rotate this around to the other end, scooch all of the beads along, including that enhanced central bead. What we need to do now is to create a loop at right angles to the first one. So if I just hold this down flat for a second, the loop on the left hand end is flat to the desk, which means that I will want the next loop on the other side to be at 90 degrees, so coming up and away. So if I just hold it in a really funny fashion for a moment and make that bend first, then I can check to make sure that they are in opposition to each other. Yep, all is well. And then we'll trim this away to around about 1/2 inch at the end. We're going to make quite a large loop because it means we can add fun things in, like these lovely flowery tassel charms from that gorgeous mix, which was Flamingo Beach. I had to check, I'd forgotten what it was called already. So let's grab hold of those round nose pliers again. And we're just going to turn another circular form on the end. Hopefully it'll be slightly less awful than the first one I did. There we go. So there's that round form. What we're going to do is make sure that that closes up all the way and give that a really hearty squish again. Now the reason for them being at 90 degrees opposition to each other is so that when you close the bangle up, one will fit inside the other. Now at the moment my wire isn't terribly straight, so the first thing I'm going to do is just make sure that I'm happy with that wire. Otherwise, once you get it into the round form, it's just a little bit more annoying to straighten up. So overall, I'm quite happy that that strand is now straight. So we're going to very, very gently form this around a circular form. Now, if you're gentle, you can absolutely use a mandrel. I do have a mandrel somewhere, just can't quite see it. What I would say is when you're bending a heavy wire inside glass or ceramic beads, just move very, very slowly. What we don't want to do is to cause any beads to shatter. It's very, very sad when it happens, but it can also be very uncomfortable if they go up your fingernail or into your skin. So always proceed with caution and just make small movements. If it is making you happier, you can create this circular form before you load the beads on. Just makes it slightly more annoying to demonstrate to you. It will work. You can add this embellishment once you're on curved wire, but you will still need that gap at either end. So allow yourself plenty of extra space and plenty of extra wire to work with. And then what we're going to do is ensure that these two loops are still in opposition to each other. That's looking pretty good. I usually make my bangles ever so slightly off round, but you can have them completely round. A bangle tends to be perfectly round, whereas a cuff is the one that has that oval form. However, today we're going to go for just slightly off round. Let's just push those two pieces until they sit really, really close together. Again, you're being careful of any ceramic beads. I just wanted to show you that you can make it in an oval form as well as in a round form. So once you've got those two sitting close to being on top of one another, what we're going to do is find the access point that is easiest to get to. So we just need to open up the loop. It's on this side. That makes much more sense. Now normally I wouldn't say open a loop in that fashion. I would say open it like a jump ring, but for this design to work you do need to open that a little bit more aggressively. And what we're going to do is just form that back inside the end that we've created. And what you'll find is if you don't like that oval form, very, very gently, again, you can re-roundify your bangle. So with this one, you could add charms on. I actually quite like it as is with those two loops sitting just inside those end gold pieces. Another thing that you can do is you can twist that embellishment round to suit you. I quite like having one stripe on either side so it's visible from all angles. Let's just make sure that fits. That fits really, really nicely actually. Let's put the other one on. These are so much fun to create. They don't take a lot of effort. They don't take a huge amount of that lighter gauge wire, and it's a great way of using up scraps. You'll notice that today I've worked in an antique bronze and a gold colour wire. I really enjoy mixing metals, and this is something that you can do again. Keep those little 6-inch scraps of 0.8mm or 20 gauge wire because they're ideal for embellishing your designs. Well, I hope that you've enjoyed my bead stash bangle with bead embellishment. Have yourself a beautiful day. If you're enjoying the content, please do feel free to drop me a like, subscribe to the channel, and let me know if you have any suggestions for future videos. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.